is basically these longevity switches in the body. And if we learn how to activate them in the right way or turn them off in the right way, we can really extend life.
We got a bunch of great questions. The first one is from Mia on the HiHo app, and she has a question that's right in alignment with everything you've been researching these days, and that's the topic of longevity, senescence, and specifically hot and cold therapy. Let's key up this video from Mia.
Hi, Mark. I'm just wondering if the best way to do cryo and heat therapy is to do cold first, then sauna, or vice versa. Thanks in advance. Bye.
Listen, Drew, I am so excited about this question because I literally just handed in my book, Young Forever, about longevity. And I went deep into the science of hormesis, which is this idea that little stress that we give to our bodies creates a response that makes us healthier and stronger. And cold and hot are two hormetic therapies. Too much cold, you get hypothermia, you die. Too much heat, you get heat stroke and die. So it's that like Goldilocks version of what do you want? And the question was essentially, should you do cold first or heat first? And I don't really think we have the science to really answer that question. But for me personally, I don't want to get in the cold first. I want to get in the hot first and then go in the cold. And then you can go back and forth and back and forth. And what's really amazing about these therapies is that they're accessible to most people. If you have a bathtub, which most people do, you can do these therapies. If you have a shower, you can do these therapies. So the best way to do it is if you can get access to a sauna or a steam. And I personally had a steam installed in my shower. You can get sauna blankets now. They're not that expensive. As you get yourself really hot, you can do a hot bath if you have a bathtub. So any kind of heat therapy will raise your body temperature. And what that does is two major things. One is it elevates something called heat shock proteins. And what are heat shock proteins? These are compounds that your body makes when you're overheated. And it's something that your body makes, for example, when you have a fever, when you're trying to fight infection. So two things happen. One is you increase the activity of your innate immune system. This is the ancient immune system that you have. It's not antibody related, like COVID, COVID antibodies and all that. You get a vaccine. It's a very specific response to a specific infection. But an innate immune system is just a generalized response that fights infection and activates your immune system. So it's really important. Second is it actually creates these heat shock proteins, which help to repair and fix damaged proteins. So just to give you a little background, Drew, and everybody, your proteins have to be not just strings of amino acids, but they're three-dimensional structures that have to look a certain way, a certain shape, to bind like a lock and a key into a receptor. And as we go through life and get various insults and stresses and poor diet and toxins and so forth, those proteins get like kind of funky and damaged. Well, these heat shock proteins help to refold the proteins into their original form and allows them to bind better to receptors, or it helps to kind of clean up and repair the whole system. So you get kind of two things. One, you get the activation of your immune system in a good way. And two, you deal with one of the key hallmarks of aging, which is protein damage. And protein damage is when your proteins get damaged, they don't work very well. And most of our biology is run by proteins. And this is kind of mind-blowing, but maybe people know this or maybe they don't. But what is your DNA? Your DNA basically is code that tells your body how to string together different amino acids to make proteins. And the proteins are the messengers and information molecules, the immune molecules, neurotransmitters. These are all the important compounds that regulate almost everything in your body. Peptides are all little proteins. So that's what they do. And your proteins have to be a certain shape and a certain sequence of amino acids, and they get damaged as we age. So as a longevity strategy, heating up your body is super awesome. That's why the Finnish live longer. And they did an amazing study in Finland where it was kind of funny. They basically tried to see how saunas were affecting your health and longevity. And the control group was people only had a sauna once a week because pretty much they do it all the time there. And if you did it up to 4, 5, 6 times a week, you had a dramatic extension in your life. That was compared to the control, which was just once a week. So who knows if you don't do any, you might even be better than that. So getting heat is really important. And I find it really important whether it's a hot bath, whether it's a sauna or a steam. I got lucky yesterday. I went to a friend who built the Russian banya, and we went really hot in there. It gets really hot. And it just kind of heats up, and it just helped my body feel all kinds of amazing
And when you
things.
say really hot, Mark, what was the temperature inside of there?
I think it was 180. I think it was really hot. It's like a Russian.
If you look at a lot of these Finnish studies and you look at the temperature that they're hitting
175,
right? 175, 180.
Yeah. For sure. And then they go in the cold and they jump, they have the cold plunge. So then the cold plunge does something quite different. The cold plunge does two major things. One, it activates your brown fat. This is your mitochondrial superpower, where basically between your shoulder blades and your back, there's a special kind of fat called brown fat, and it's metabolically active fat. And you activate this brown fat, it increases your metabolism. And it's really interesting because, I can't do it, but like guys like Wim Hof and other people learn how to activate the brown fat to heat up their bodies in the face of extreme cold temperatures. And this was originally a Tibetan practice where they would take these Tibetan monks and they had a practice called drying of the sheets, and this practice called tumo. They literally wrapped these young monks after they learned this practice in sheets dipped in ice water. They'd wrap them in the sheets in the middle of the Himalayas in the winter time, and they'd have to dry the sheets. And when they could finally dry the sheets, they would send them up basically in their underwear up into the snow overnight. And basically they didn't die because they learned how to activate this brown fat. So cold therapy really helps activate this brown fat, speed up your metabolism. The other thing it does is really amazing. It's like, I hate to say it, but it's like cocaine for me. It activates dopamine, which is what cocaine does. And it creates a sustained release of dopamine, which is what we're all trying to get more of for pleasure, focus, attention, feeling good, alert, and just like able to really do stuff. And it's really quite amazing. And so it's like taking a snort of cocaine when you go in an ice bath and you come out and you're like, whoa, I feel alert, I feel focused, I feel energetic, I can do anything. So I love going back and forth, and I would go hot and cold, hot and cold. And to me, when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, it was the only thing that really helped me have moments of actually feeling okay was through this hot and cold therapy. So I'm kind of addicted to it. I do it wherever I go in the world. I try to find it. I was in Turkey recently. I went to one of the hammams. I always am trying to figure out. I did the polar plunge in Antarctica. We went for the head of sauna on the boat. We went to the polar plunge. So it's kind of like amazing. And the cold plunges are quite awesome. I was just in Idaho, and I went in and it's really, really hot springs, and then jumped in the icy river. And so the more you can do that, and not everybody can do the things I do, but if you can do it even in your cold shower in the morning, like 1 to 2 minutes in a cold shower, fill up a hot bath with hot water as hot as you can stand it, go back and forth, hot and cold. I go in my steam, and I fill up my bath with really cold water, and I just go back and forth. I have a friend who's got he bought at the hardware store, a trough they use for feeding cows and horses water. And he basically, it's an ice maker. And he got all his ice in there, pours in water, and you go with ice cubes all around you. So there's lots of creative ways to do it that don't cost a lot of money.
Awesome. I love it. So a bunch of clarifying questions, Mark, before we go to the next question.
Yeah.
So first thing, I think you're on record saying it's like cocaine, but obviously everybody knows that we're not.
No. I don't snort cocaine. I'm not a fan of cocaine. I'm just saying we're all trying to activate dopamine, right? We're all think about the things that activate dopamine. Heroin, cocaine, smoking, caffeine, all the things we use to kind of prop us up. But this is a natural way that you can enhance dopamine. And what's amazing about it is that it has a sustained effect. It's not just like one shot and you get a snort and then you're a crash. It's like it really helps to sustain the dopamine and the noradrenaline and norepinephrine in a way that actually helps you stay focused and alert. So no, I'm not saying that you should go down and snort cocaine. And by the way, the other thing that activates it, and I got to do this the other night. It was super fun. I didn't tell you about this, Drew, yet, but I'm an older dude, and I grew up in the era of the Grateful Dead, and I got to go to one of the Dead and Company shows recently in Boulder, and a friend of mine is the manager, and he gave us these free tickets. And I had another friend with me, and basically you go out and you give tickets to people who are trying to get in who don't have tickets. There's a lot of people go to these Dead shows and they're desperate to get in, but they don't have money or they couldn't get a ticket. And there's a song called "Waiting for a Miracle," and it's and everybody has these signs of waiting for a miracle. And so you go out and you give these tickets to people, and it's like a miracle. I might post one of the pictures where this the amount of joy and the amount of pleasure you get from actually giving and altruism, because we're all wired to help each other. We're all wired as social creatures, because think about a human being out in the forest by themselves. They're kind of screwed, right? We are tribal people. We have to help each other. We have to work together. And so we're hardwired for altruism, and altruism also activates dopamine in the brain. So there's lots of ways to activate it, but I like giving things away and cold therapy.
Yeah. And the best part about that compared to, drugs that are out there. And by the way, it's really interesting. I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories of people using in conjunction with maybe AA or treatment centers that they're going to, how a lot of these processes actually help them get over their addictions.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sure some people are out there studying it, like they're studying it with psilocybin and smoking cessation. We had Dr. Roland Griffiths on the podcast before, but it'll be exciting to see people starting to use hot therapy, cold therapy to actually treat addiction. So a couple other
Wait. I want to add one more thing. I want one more thing.
Yes, please.
The one thing I forgot to say, which is something I've written about for the last 30 years that activates dopamine, is sugar. So I don't know why I forgot it, but when you go for that cookie or that pint of ice cream or whatever it is, that is activating the same receptors that we're talking about through the dopamine receptors in the brain in the nucleus accumbens. And so that's why people literally get addicted to sugar. But I'm more addicted to cold therapy and giving and service, and that's how I get high, basically.
So you mentioned a few things that I think are worth breaking down. So we talked about the finished studies and the high temperatures that are there, 170, 175, 180 potentially.
Yeah. And
generally the time length inside of those. And again, if somebody's new to hot therapy, obviously, first of all, saunas can be, it's expensive to have a sauna in your house, but you can find saunas at local like gyms and other places. And, you can borrow
YMCA,
friends
right,
and use them. But a lot of people ask, and there's some great companies that are out there that, we've known throughout the years, but they ask, what about infrared sauna? It can't get that hot. Are there still the benefits that are there, even if the body of literature may not support, the heat that they're getting to? So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there is literature on infrared saunas too, and it penetrates a little deeper. You can stay in it longer, and it doesn't get, the temperature doesn't get hot, but it does heat you up quite a bit. So I think either work, and there are a number of things I didn't actually mention about heat, which is that it also increases the health of your cardiovascular system. It helps with weight loss. It increases the release of toxins from your skin through your sweat. It increases heart rate variability, which is one of the best metrics of your autonomic nervous system, your health of your stress response. So a lot of us are overstressed and we have really poor heart rate variability. I wear an Oura ring and I can track my heart rate variability and I can see what makes it good or bad. And it's amazing to see how correlated was your stress response. And the higher your heart rate variability, the more complex your heart rhythm is, the healthier you are. So people, for example, have heart failure, go into these saunas and they actually improve their heart failure just by increasing the health of their autonomic nervous system. So it's really quite powerful.
Okay, great. That's a good option because for a lot of people, like you mentioned earlier, sauna blankets, and there's a bunch of great brands that are out there. Those can be an entryway that's a little bit more affordable. But like you said, you could even do a bath. So if somebody was going to do a bath, and they were going to hop in, how long are we talking about staying in? Just like a general rule of thumb, if people are going to use their bath in a warm bath, how long are we talking about staying in there?
Well, I've written about this for years. One of my favorite things to do is I do an Epsom salt bath with lavender drops. And lavender lowers cortisol. That's why they put it in baby bath. Johnson & Johnson actually has done the research on this, and it lowers the stress response. And Epsom salt has magnesium, which relaxes your muscles and nervous system, helps you sleep. And the sulfur in Epsom salt's magnesium sulfate helps you detoxify. So it's really great. And I heat the water up as hot as I can stand it. So everybody's got a different tolerance for heat, but it's like where you have to get in, you kind of have to get in slowly because it's kind of too hot and you can barely stand it. That's kind of good. And you might be able to stay 5 minutes, you might be able to stay 15 minutes. So you stay until you kind of get really hot, and then you can go right into bed, and as your body cools down, you'll fall right asleep. So it's a great tool for sleep. It's a great tool for muscle relaxation. It's a great tool for detoxification. It's a great tool for doing things like heat shock proteins. And, it's quite amazing. I just reminded me of this data that I saw in this sort of anecdotal stuff that I've heard of case reports of autism. So autism is a disease of the brain that actually is about inflammation. And a lot of the inflammation causes a lot of malfunction in the brain through these deformed proteins and other things in the immune system. And it's been observed that when kids who have autism have high fevers, that they wake up from autism. And then when the fever goes back, they go back to being autistic. So it's really fascinating to see how heat plays a role in so many of the functions of our body. We're just really beginning to understand this.
So Mark, one more follow-up question. Right now you're recording the podcast out of San Francisco. It's great that we have modern technology that allows us to record anywhere. So this is awesome. So for instance, because you travel a lot, what are one of the ways, for example, now, how you're looking to incorporate hot and cold therapy in because it's become part of your routine? So on a practical level, is it that you just have a lot of friends that are so into this too, that you stay at their houses and you just get to borrow their sauna? Like any tips for people when they're on traveling?
I mean, yeah. I mean, listen, if you're booking a hotel room, try to get one with a bathtub. And I mean, most hotel rooms hopefully will have a shower. So you got a hot tub and you got a cold shower. It's pretty easy. Or you can fill the bathtub with cold water, or you can get ice cubes from the shower. So there's a lot of ways to do it. I really make a point of seeking this out. And I really have learned how to sort of hack my travel life so that I can stay healthy and then I can stay rested and I can keep rejuvenating myself. So yeah, I have friends who have this, and I'm lucky because I'll tell my friends about it and then they'll get it, and then that's sort of kind of fun. But it doesn't have to be super fancy. You can just have a shower and a bathtub, and that really is an easy way to do it for most people.
And a couple more clarifying questions. So how does this fit in your day with your normal routine? And also when it comes to exercising and your movement that you have in your life, is this something that you typically like to do before that or after that? So when does hot and cold therapy come in, and how does that play a role in timeline, again, with exercise?
So let's say I'm in my routine at home, and I've written about this in my new book, Young Forever, What's Dr. Hyman's Daily Longevity Routine. I mean, I just saw a guy who kind of was a fan. He had seen me in person. We were actually in the sauna together in the Russian banya yesterday. And he's like, man, you look better than you did 5 years ago. Another person, you look better than you did 10 years ago. I'm like, yeah, because I'm figuring all this stuff out. And so I actually have a routine in the morning where I'll wake up and meditate 20 minutes and then I usually work out. And I travel with these bands, and I had back surgery a couple of years ago, and I learned really how to rehabilitate through Tom Brady's training program. I don't get any money for it. I'm not associated with it anyway, but it's the TB12 Sports program. And I use these basically bands, and I bring them with me. I travel them everywhere. And all I need is the bands on a floor, basically. And sometimes something to hook it onto, like a doorknob in a hotel room or a post somewhere to do some of the exercises. And so I do a workout for 30 minutes, and that's kind of a standard thing I can do anywhere I am. And then if I'm home, I like to do steam. I have a steam shower. So I put the steam on while I'm working out. I'll go into steam super hot, like 10 minutes. And then I'll fill up a bath just with ice cold water, and I go back and forth maybe a couple of times. And then afterwards, I have a protein shake. And I'll usually use my Pecan Shake protein powder. I think we're discontinuing that. And I'll use goat whey. And the reason I use goat whey is because goats are they're regenerative the way that the ones that I find are regeneratively raised. And two, they have, because all the whey has some casein in it. It can be inflammatory. I use goat whey because it has A2 casein. And then I add the whey, and then I put all my other goodies in it, which I talk about in the book, my longevity kind of package of stuff. And that's my kind of routine. And then I just feel amazing for the day. I don't have any problems, with energy, and I really can focus. And it's just a great way to start the day. And I can probably get all that done in about an hour. So with the meditation sort of adds probably 20 minutes. So maybe an hour and a half. But it's really an amazing way to start the day. And then I get to do what I do.
And I'm sure you have a truncated version that you do on days where you don't have that full hour, because there's probably people that are listening today that are like, whoa, an hour, I'm lucky if I get 20 minutes that's there. Of course, a big part of your message is always that you feel so good. So it's not like a chore for you to do this. You actually are looking forward to doing it. But give us the truncated version. When you have 20 minutes and there's a super busy day and you're in launch mode or whatever, you got to catch like 4 or 5 flights. What is kind of your absolute 1 or 2 things that is like crucial for you in the day?
Well, I mean, I think, even if I can just get like 20 minutes of my workout in, not a full half hour, or I do 2 sets instead of 3 sets, like I did today, because I had a lot going on. So I did 2 sets, and then, I'm ready for my podcast. And sometimes I have time for, hot and cold, or I don't, and I just don't do it on those days. So I always make sure that I take quality time. And the meditation thing is super portable. So I do a kind of meditation. It's like a version of a Vedic mantra meditation. So you don't need to be like in a quiet room, and like I can do it on an airplane. I can do it in the back of an Uber. I can do it, anywhere. And I can just kind of go in, and I just kind of, the world disappears, and I disappear. I don't know where I go, but it's like taking a 3-hour nap. So for me, these are productivity tools. If I work out and if I do this meditation, I have so much more focus and more energy that whatever I'm doing, I do way better and more focused. And instead of taking me twice as long, it takes me half as long, and I do a better job. So in some ways, it seems like it's taking time, but actually it's saving time in the end.
So, Mark, before we get back to these video questions, I actually have a question for you that maybe I'm not super clear on, even though we're business partners and close friends. So, working out now is such a core part of your life. And I know you like the word movement, right? That's a big part of
Yeah.
your approach. It's kind of a movement mindset. What happened a few years ago that shifted for you where it was kind of like a nice thing? You were active, you'd play tennis every so often, you might do some, hiking, to like it switched and it was like, whoa, this is foundational to my life. And it's kind of like, I'm not going to sacrifice it in my day. What was that switch that took place?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I've always exercised, be a runner. I did yoga. I was a yoga teacher. I bike. I played tennis. So I always stayed very active. But, in my mind, I had this rationale that, if I do yoga and I ride my bike or I play tennis, like I'm good. And I always told people they should lift weights, but I just hated the gym. It was smelly, it's stinky. I didn't like it. And it hurt when I did weights. I couldn't do 10 push-ups when I was 50 years old. I'm like, this hurts every time. I don't like it. It's the truth. So
what kind of pain? Just curious. What kind of pain?
I can
were
do
you
10
having?
push-ups. Your chest hurts for days. Like I could do 10 push-ups, my chest,
Okay.
I had all this muscle pain, from lifting weights. I would try it and I'm like, I sore for days. I'm like, this is stupid. I'm not doing this. So, I mean, even though I know in my head, it was like, I knew I should do it. And then I'm like, then I turned 60 and I'm like, all right. I'm like, I gotta get smart here because I tell everybody to do it and I can't be a hypocrite and I have to do it. So I started to, I joined a gym and I got a trainer and I started doing a little bit. But then I had a back problem again. After 30 years, I had another back thing and I had surgery in 2020. And then I couldn't move. I couldn't walk. I was in pain all the time. It was pretty miserable. And I'm like, look, this is bad. And I have a limp. I had a limp for 20 years and my body was all out of kilter. And so it was just getting worse and worse. I'm like, how can I live to be 120 if I can't walk? So I basically had the surgery, took my time to sort of heal from the surgery. And then I went to the Tom Brady training program. And it was such a revelation for me because I was able to start really slow. The bands, they don't injure your joints. You can do them anywhere. It's not like I have to take an hour, drive to the gym, get going. It's like takes hours of my day. I just don't have that kind of time. So like literally I got back from what I was doing today. I, had some food ordered, jumped down in, was down here in where I'm staying. I just put my underwear on. I didn't even have workout shorts and I didn't need shoes or anything. I just like grabbed my bands and I did a quick workout. So, but it really became foundational when I realized that if I wanted to stay strong and out of pain, I had to do this. So I really doubled down on it and I will do it minimum 3 times a week, sometimes 4 or 5. So I really am committed to it and I take it with me everywhere. And in fact, I forgot it at a friend's house the other day because I was rambling because we were all working out and I was leading a workout of 5 people and we had it in this one spot and I left and I forgot it and I was like in a panic and I called my friend, hey, you got it FedEx to me like right away. I need it tomorrow morning. So I got it and I have it here and I did my workout. So it really becomes routine and you can take it anywhere. You can do it almost anywhere. And I mean, I even show you, I got the bands right here. So if you want, I can go show you, but it's pretty easy.
Well, no, I mean, you got me hooked on it. And now I do a training session with their virtual coaches on at least 2 to 3 times a week. And it's a fantastic thing. Again, we have no affiliation with them. They have a free app that's there, so that people can do those workouts. You can go on YouTube, type in TB12 and, there's a bunch of them that are there. So one clarifying question on that. You mentioned that, you used to do 10 push-ups before and like your chest would hurt. Do you think
I can do 70 now with no right in a row.
That's
and
great.
I do with
That's
bands. I can do like 3 sets of 25 with the bands around my back. So like it's unbelievable. Like I'm way stronger now at 62 than I was at 40 or 50.
All right. Well, we're going to fact check you maybe on one of our next podcasts. We are going to do push-ups together.
Okay. All right.
But so the question
seriously, Drew, I'm not bragging, Drew, but like I work out with my friends. Like I worked out with a 30-year-old and then the 40-year-old and like the guy was 50 and like none of them could do what I did. And I was using the heavier bands and they were all like, and I was like, come on, guys.
No, that's great,
once you
Mark.
build up to it, it really works.
I've seen you over the years. We've worked out a few times together too. It's very inspiring. So the question that I had was this: is it that you've just been doing a different training routine, or also has how you've changed your diet? Specifically, I have a question about sort of prioritizing protein. Has that also helped you in your ability to build up more strength during your workouts? So that's the question that I had for you.
Yeah. So again, this is a really controversial topic, which is protein. Where do you get your protein? How much protein? When do you eat your protein? Like, it's complicated. And there's movies like Game Changers will come out, which make people think that, oh, you can be vegan and just be this huge, strong bodybuilder and just, eat vegetables. And I think, there's a subtext to that. These guys are and I've talked to them, they're pounding highly processed vegan protein powders, or they're eating jacked up protein powders that are supplemented with amino acids. And you can't overcome biology. And the science is so clear. So there was a group of scientists that got together that are protein experts, and they wrote a review paper of all the literature. It's called PROTAGE, PROTAGE study. And they basically came up with the conclusion that particularly as we age, we need more high quality protein, and we need it regularly throughout the day, and we need it to contain certain amino acids in the right amounts. So one of the problems with plant proteins is that it's very low in a key amino acid called leucine and other branched chain amino acids. Leucine is a rate limiting amino acid when it comes to making more muscle. In other words, it's like if you have a factory and you have an assembly line and you're missing this one key step, like if you like making a car, but you don't have tires, you just can't make the car. And leucine is like that. If you don't have leucine, you can't kick in the biochemical machinery to synthesize new muscle. So either you have to eat massive amounts of plant protein, like for example, like you have to eat 3 cups of rice to equal 4 ounces of chicken. Now who's going to eat 3 cups of rice? It's a lot of rice, or a bunch of 2 or 3 cups of beans. And then you get 1,000 or 1,300 calories as opposed to 200 calories. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to eat grains and beans. I'm just saying it's very tough to get what you need. And if you look at what happens to a lot of beings as they get older, they get skinny and they have low muscle mass, and their hormones change, and they get more insulin resistant. And there are ways around it. So if you're vegan and you're committed to being vegan, I'm not against it, but you have to be smart. You have to, for example, use extra branched chain amino acid supplements, or you can take, for example, additional amino acids through something that I use in my practice that's been studied a lot in research in Europe. It's called amino acid complex, which is a combination of amino acids that's designed to increase muscle synthesis and combat what we call sarcopenia, which means low muscle mass. So for me, and what I also said was you need to eat the right amount of protein within an hour of working out, and in order to actually activate the muscle synthesis. And you need to eat it with the right amino acids. And you need to about 20, depending on your size and build. So obviously, if you're like Shaquille O'Neal and 7 feet tall, you might need a lot more. And if you're 5'0" and 100 pounds, you might need less. But it's about 25 grams to 30 grams of protein, which is usually about the size of your palm. So the best way to think about it for the average person is the size of your palm of protein. And I say this, like when I say protein, I mean, if you want to build muscle, you have to eat muscle, basically. And you can kind of cheat by either combining animal protein, like less animal protein, with plant protein, or by eating jacked up plant proteins where you add in these amino acids. So there's a lot of ways around it, but you can't argue with biology and with science. And it's just so clear. And if you don't believe me, if you're think I'm sort of making this all up, just go ahead and look up that PROTAGE study. I've written a lot about it in my new book, Young Forever, which is coming out February 23. And I've used it on myself, and I'm like, holy cow. Like, I look at pictures of myself when I was 40, and I'm like, I was biking, 30 miles, and I was doing yoga, and I was doing all this stuff. And my body just looks like it looks like then I was 60 and now I'm like 25. So I don't know what's going on, but like it worked. What I'm telling you works. And when I use it with my patients, it really works. And that's really the science that I've adapted to myself. And it's really changed my biology and my cognitive function, my energy. And I really, really lowered more dramatically even the starch and sugar. Because when I started doing nutrition back in the 90s and being a doctor in functional medicine, that was the era where still we're telling you to do a lot of carbohydrates, and even healthy carbohydrates like grains and beans. But for some people, it's tough. And if you're one of the the people who are metabolically unhealthy, which is almost 9 out of 10 Americans, then you're not going to tolerate the amount of starch and sugar that you could, for example, if you were more lean and fit and robust. So I can get away with eating stuff sometimes that if, for example, my diabetic patients can't because they're not metabolically flexible. And I train myself to become more metabolically flexible. And so I can actually have more metabolic degrees of freedom, we call it. And I'm not saying you should always eat junk, but I'm just saying I can get away with having a dessert once in a while or having some coconut ice cream or something and not worry about it. But I think for the most part, it's really about lowering dramatically the starch and sugar, increasing the fat, and actually keeping not excess of protein, but keeping the right amount of protein. And the other thing, Drew, is a lot of people say, the government says we should have about 0.8 grams per kilo of protein. That's a kilo is about 2.2 pounds. Now, that's the minimum amount to prevent protein deficiency disease. It's not the optimal amount for health. It's like when you say, how much vitamin C is the minimal, the recommended amount? It's like 60 milligrams. Or how much is the vitamin D amount that's recommended to prevent deficiency? It's like 30 units, which prevents rickets. Well, okay, you're not going to get rickets, but what's the optimal amount of vitamin D you need to operate all your biological systems well? Well, it might be 2,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 or 10,000. So I think this is where we get all confused in nutrition because the government recommendations are designed around deficiency diseases, not for optimal health.
So one last follow-up on that question, and thank you for that breakdown on the protein. I think some people who are paying attention to the space of longevity, which a lot of different people are talking about.
Oh, God. Okay.
There is the question of okay, well, we know we need enough protein to avoid sarcopenia. And then some people are saying, whether it's IGF-1 or other stuff, that excess protein could hinder longevity. And then you have people like Peter Attia, who kind of has a philosophy that you do, which is that if we look at a lot of these large observational studies that are being used to say that excess protein can harm our longevity, they're looking at people who are not really consuming a lot of vegetables in their diet. And on top of that, they have they have poor metabolic health as well too. So is it the metabolic health or is it the high protein? Yeah. So would love to get your take on the situation since we're all.
I mean, it's super complicated, right? Because a lot of people who look at the data on protein and aging go, wow, protein activates something called mtor. And I mean, I don't know if I want to get into that now, Drew, but I'm so deep in it because I just finished my book. So I'll sort of explain what the science is about. So there's basically these longevity switches in the body, and they're really powerful. And if we learn how to activate them in the right way, or turn them off in the right way, the ones that need to be turned off, we can really extend life. So, for example, calorie restriction is one of the few things that's been shown to dramatically extend life. If you cut your calories by a third, you extend your life by a third. And that for a human means living to 120. Now, personally, I don't want to do that because I like to eat and it's not fun. And you're going to be grumpy and hungry and you're going to have other downside effects from it. I met this guy who was part of the Calorie Restriction Society. He's like, I said, what do you have for breakfast? I have 5 pounds of celery. And I'm like, okay, no thanks. So
right. And if he's also eating 5 pounds of celery, is he more likely to fall and have a hip fracture and end up dying at the age of 80 because he doesn't have enough muscle mass?
Exactly. So the main thing that people are talking about protein is this thing called mtor. Now, that's one of the longevity switches, but there's 4 of them. 2 of them are detecting excess and are turned on by an abundance or excess of compounds like amino acids and carbohydrates. So that's the mTOR pathway, and that's the insulin pathway. Now, we need both of them, right? It's like you need mTOR to be turned on because otherwise you can't build muscle and synthesize protein, right? But if it's turned on all the time, and it's, by the way, turned on by not just protein, but also by sugar, okay? Then you're just going to create it's like a tumor that grows out of hand. It just you don't get this chance to repair the body. So think about like your kitchen. Like if you just kind of threw dishes in the sink and you never cleaned up and you kept putting garbage in the garbage can and you just never clean up, well then your kitchen's going to be a mess and you're not going to be able to do anything. And that's basically what the body is. You need time to both cook dinner and then clean up, right? And so that's what the body does. And mTOR, when it's turned on, actually synthesizes protein, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, like muscle. But if it's turned on all the time, you can't activate this really essential process that we now know is so critical to longevity that we activate during starvation or calorie restriction, which is something called autophagy, which essentially means self-cannibalism. Auto means self, and phagy means to eat, like macrophages and a white blood cell that eats bad things. And, so you want to eat yourself up, essentially. It's recycling. So you need both the construction crew and you need the recycling crew. And it's got to be in the right balance. So yes, we need to shut off mTOR or silence mTOR or lower mTOR, but not all the time. And so that's why we talk about, having a 12 to 14 to 16-hour window between dinner and breakfast. That's really important. At least, and you can kind of decide when you want to do that, but you got to be sure you don't eat 3 hours before bed, whatever you do. It's not going to work if you, say start eating at 6 o'clock at night and then eat till midnight and go to bed at midnight. That's a bad idea. So you want to make sure you give yourself 3 hours before bed. But if you give yourself these periods of temporary starvation, right? Like a 12-hour fast, 14, 16, it really activates this self-cleaning process. It's like a self-cleaning oven, right? And our bodies can do that. And you can also do it by doing a deeper clean, like a 24 or 36-hour fast once a week, or a 3 to 7 day fast, once a quarter. So there's a lot of ways to do it, or the fasting mimicking diet, which is Walter Longo's work, which does the same thing. It's a 800 calorie diet for 5 days. And you can do that once a month or once a quarter. So there's a lot of ways to hack the system. Ketogenic diets do the same thing. But the idea is you want to give your body a period of rest. So the people who say, well, don't eat protein, it's going to activate mTOR, and mTOR activated is going to kill you and make you live shorter. It just doesn't take into account the whole picture. And so you have to look at all the data. Even the main study that people quote about this shows that if you're younger and you eat protein, it may not be good, but a lot of protein. But if you're older, if you don't, it's really bad. So even the people who are saying that we should be restricting protein, as you get older, there really is no debate that we need protein. In fact, as you get older, you need way more protein. Why? Because there's something called anabolic resistance. Anabolic resistance means anabolic hormones and what steroids people take to kind of build up the bodybuilders. Anabolic means to build up, right? There's an anabolic, it's like yin and yang. It's like, the sun and the moon. It's like day and night. There's this balance in the universe. And we have the anabolic, which is build up, and we have a catabolic, which is to break down and clean up. So if you're always in anabolic state, that's bad. But anabolic resistance happens as you get older, where your body is harder to make protein muscle. So you actually have to eat more protein as you get older. So, and that doesn't mean you have to be eating 24-ounce ribeye steaks every day. It just means you need to actually understand what your body is doing and measure it and see and pay attention to what happens to your body. Are you gaining muscle? Or are you losing muscle? And then you can tell by just looking in the mirror, or you can do these body composition tests and look at your muscle mass and your body fat mass and so forth. So science is so interesting about this, but it's like everything in the universe, there's a balance. And so it's not like we always want to shut off mTOR. And there may be hacks, like I talked about in my book, this thing called rapamycin, which is essentially a compound that's really cool, Drew. They found on Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island, where they had these statues that they don't know how they got there, and it's like maybe it's aliens, who the hell knows, but basically they found this compound in the back of one of the statues that they started studying, and they found, maybe it's in antifungal, they call rapamycin, like erythromycin, but then it didn't really work that well. Then they found it helps to modulate immune function, so it's used in transplant medicine. But they also found it actually silences mTOR. In fact, mTOR means the mammalian target of rapamycin. So actually, they named this particular pathway after rapamycin. And when you take rapamycin, it kind of silences mTOR. So now there's a lot of people who are in the longevity space taking it. I don't recommend it yet. They're actually studying, for example, rapalogs, which are things that mimic rapamycin without some of the side effects, because it can have side effects. So I think you're going to be kind of smart about this, but the whole longevity research is fascinating. So they're kind of, think of it as starvation in a pill, where you mimic starvation without actually starving. I kind of like that.
I think one central point that you made that's really important for anybody who's following along with the subject is that even something like exercise, that increases mTOR, but just acutely. And nobody says that exercise is bad. So to all of a sudden say that eating a higher protein diet to make sure that you don't have muscle mass loss, especially as you age. But even when you're younger, and you mentioned vegans. I used to be a vegan back in the day. I'm not a vegan now, but even still, people who are not vegan and eat all sorts of different food, they can also be under eating on protein because they have a lot of refined carbohydrates and other things inside of their diet. And they're just they're not tactical about making sure that they get enough protein. And of course, the importance of strength training. So it's all a lot of layers to it, but it feels like through discussion and more people talking about it, we can all get a chance to benefit from the industry and experts understanding how to better convey the messaging inside of the right context for the public to follow.
Yeah, maybe we can have like a debate with like Peter Attia and David Sinclair and and Chris Kresser and Walter Longo, and we can have like a conversation about this because I think it would be so fascinating.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great people, and there are, just to.
And by the way, they're all my friends, and I respect them all, and I've learned a lot from all of them. It's just everybody's got a little it's like the blind man and the elephant looking at a different piece of it.
Totally. And we should never assume that we're not not me. I'm just an interviewer. You're
I'm one of the blind men too.
We should never estimate that. We should never underestimate our ability to be also in that camp as well. But, for anybody who is vegan, just a little shout out that I want to make a mention of. There are people inside of the vegan community that are talking about the importance of making sure that vegans especially get protein and have high quality protein recipes. Mark, I come from the Hindu background, and that's like the Vedic tradition, the Hindu tradition. A lot of those people, the Jain tradition, they sort of spiritually believe that, we shouldn't be eating animals. And obviously, that's a tradition.
But they eat a lot of dairy too, right?
And they eat a lot of dairy and, that sort of thing. So they don't believe in eating animal meat, but there's still an importance in prioritizing protein. So one gentleman, Simon Hill, he's a nutritionist, and I believe has a PhD in nutrition. He is a vegan, plant-based who talks a lot about, high protein recipes. And I'm sure there's many things that he disagrees with you on or me on, but he is telling people to prioritize protein. So there is even a divide in the camp. It's not like all of a sudden all vegans think that don't eat protein. There are people that are looking at the literature and saying, no, actually, we have to prioritize protein, especially as we age.
And by the way, I do have a lot of patients that are vegetarian or vegan, they're Buddhist. I mean, I don't think you have to eat meat to be healthy, but I do say, look, here's how you adjust your amino acids through supplements or through various protein powders to compensate. And it makes a huge difference.
It does. So, since we're on this train, Mark, and, we've only taken one question here, but I feel like we're on a roll. So let's keep on going here, right? I'm going to just take you on. Okay. I know, when we have to record these podcasts together, people are like, what are you going to talk about? I'm like, look, anytime I can get Mark talking about his favorite subjects, these things will fly by and it'll be a lot easier to record. And this is actually what most people are interested in right now. So last week, on the topic of things that people take for longevity, last week, Metformin was in the news for a few different, reasons. Can you talk a little bit about that? And again, whether or not this changes your perspective when we're talking about potentially prescription drugs that people are leaning on in the biohacking space to maybe help with longevity or maybe not help with longevity?
Yeah, fair enough. So listen, I'm not against medication, just out of the gate, not at all. I think they're compounds, right? These are compounds we use. And I joke, I say I'm a medicine man. I'll use whatever works, whether it's, an herb or whether it's medication. It's just how it's used, when it's used, why it's used. Is it the right medicine for the right problem, the right dose at the right time? And so it's really important to understand the mechanisms, how they work, what the risks are, what the side effects are. And I think with metformin, we're going to learn a lot more. There's a large trial going on called the TAME trial, which is targeting aging with metformin. And it's a very big, government-funded rigorous trial where we're going to get better answers. My view on metformin is, I would say, I'm on the fence. Just to be honest, I'm on the fence. I was a hard no, and now I'm on the fence. And I really looked deeply into the literature as I was researching my book. I'm like, okay, put all my biases aside, all my judgments aside against it. The thing that concerns me is that there's and when I was researching my book, and just being a doctor doing this for decades, there are so many ways to do the same thing that metformin does without some of the risks or the problems. And the things that actually are not medications may work better. Like rapamycin, for example, it's tough like that. It's tough to replicate that through lifestyle, right? Yes, you can eat 30% less food, but you're going to be hungry and cranky and miserable and feel a lot longer, even though you live longer, right? But with metformin, there was a large trial a number of years ago called the Diabetes Prevention Trial, the DPP. And this is a very well-respected trial. It's been replicated on those following data. And this trial basically looked at pre-diabetics, about 10,000 people, and then gave them lifestyle changes, and I'll explain that in a minute, metformin or nothing. And the lifestyle changes far outperformed metformin. So, I think the metformin reduced the progression to diabetes by 31%. The lifestyle reduced the progression to diabetes by 58%. Now, I actually had a woman who worked with me on one of my books as it sort of helped me edit it. And she was in the diabetes prevention trial. I said, so tell me exactly what did you do? She said, well, we had a low-fat diet. We had group support. We had supervised exercise. And we had to account for everything we did. So I'm like, oh, okay. So yes, you ate a healthier diet. It was, not processed junk food, but it was a low-fat diet. So it was a higher carbohydrate diet. 2, you had group support. 3, you had accountability. And 4, you had supervised exercise. So, that collection, we all know that all those things can make a difference. Getting off junk food helps. But it turns out that high carbohydrate diets are not the best diets for diabetics. In fact, they're the worst diets for diabetics. And David Ludwig's work has really demonstrated this. The work of Sarah Hallberg, a friend of mine who recently died of breast cancer, God bless her. She was done tremendous research using some of the Rupa Health data on ketogenic diets in diabetics, fully reversing type 2 diabetes. Not managing diabetes, but fully reversing it in 60% of patients. And so we know that even in the diabetes prevention trial, the diet was far from optimized. And even that was far better than metformin, like almost twice as good as metformin in preventing diabetes. So then I say to myself, well, if that's true, why lean on the drug when we know we can activate the same longevity pathways as metformin? Now, what metformin does is it works on, remember I mentioned these longevity switches. So 2 of them are detecting excess insulin. It detects excess glucose and sugars and carbohydrates, mtor, excess protein, and also sugar. And then there are sirtuins and also the AMPK. And I'll explain it in a minute because it's a little complicated. This is the hardest part of the book, and my editors give me a hard time because it's like, this is really important science, but it's kind of geeky. And I try to simplify it. But basically, the way I describe it is there's 4 longevity switches, the mTOR and the insulin ones, which respond to excess of calories and carbohydrates, sugars, proteins. And then there's the ones that detect scarcity. There's the sirtuins and the one called AMPK. AMPK stands for AMP, adenosine monophosphate kinase. Now, that sounds like a big mumbo jumbo full of words, but essentially your body makes energy called ATP. It's what happens when you eat and you breathe. You make the gasoline that runs everything in your body through the mitochondria, the powerhouse of your cell. And instead of gasoline, your body produces ATP. Now, when it's used up, you're giving 2 phosphorus molecules away as part of the way you release energy. The phosphorus is like the sparklers on July 4th. That's like that bright energy. You're basically using that to kind of run and power your body. So when you use up 2 of the phosphorus molecules, it goes from ATP, which is triphosphate, to monophosphate. That's AMP. And so basically the body says, oh, shoot, there's not enough energy around. I better do something. And so then it activates all these amazing compensation processes, these sort of adaptations to starvation, which is a good thing. And that actually turns off inflammation. It gets your mitochondria making new mitochondria. It activates sirtuins to activate DNA repair. It shuts off mTOR to increase autophagy. And so there's all this cool stuff that happens that basically makes you younger and heals your body. So it's all these innate healing mechanisms we have. And it's so cool because all these innate healing mechanisms allow us to repair, heal, and live longer and not die if we don't have enough food. Okay? So metformin is an AMPK activator. And that's good. And that's how it lowers blood sugar, makes you more insulin sensitive. It's a diabetes drug. And it seemed to be that people who take these drugs seem to live longer, have less death. It's kind of interesting. So I kind of think there's a promise to it, but there's some downsides to it. It can cause GI distress. It can maybe affect the mitochondria in a bad way. So I'm kind of on the fence. And I personally want to be healthy and vibrant. I want to be 120 or 180, but I'm not taking that drug yet. And I know a lot of people are in the space, like David Sinclair and others, and I respect what they're doing, and they're amazing scientists. I just know the power of lifestyle, and I know the power of lifestyle to activate these pathways. And what's even more interesting, and it's a whole other podcast we can get into sometime, is the plant compounds that we have co-evolved with also regulate these pathways. So there are all these cool things that we can eat or herbs we can use. And Drew, I just got back from Ikaria, which is one of the blue zones, and Dan Buettner hooked me up with somebody there, and he's the guy who wrote the Blue Zones book, a really amazing friend and great guy who's really discovered a lot of the longevity secrets of these blue zones for people who could be very old. They for example, were eating all these wild foods like wild greens, and every day they drank this special tea that's made from wild herbs, and there's wild herbs everywhere. One of them is wild sage, and I was like, and actually one morning I went to go milk goats with this goat guy, this goat shepherd, and he's like, "Come on, sit down." So he showed me how to make the goat cheese, and we made the goat cheese. It was kind of fun. And then after he's like, "Let's have some tea and talk." And of course he's a Greek. I didn't speak Greek, but they had a translator there, and we had this amazing wild sage tea. And I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. So I like looked up what it was, and I looked up the scientific name, and then I studied what was in it. And it's full of all these things called epigalactic catechins, which is these powerful compounds in green tea, but there was no caffeine. And these are these green tea extracts, these compounds are also in wild sage, activate a lot of these longevity switches. So there's all these plant compounds we can use that are part of food and other things that I think are way better than taking metformin. So that's my opinion now. It might change when the TAME trial comes out if the benefits are so great. So I'm not against it. I'm just kind of waiting.
Yeah. And I think that, I didn't dig into the science of what came up last week, but I think it was in the news specifically for potentially interfering with muscle growth inside of the body. Do you know if that was the case?
So mitochondria, that's the thing. So that's the thing. It's got a dark side. All drugs have a dark side, right? So like, for example, rapamycin turns off mTOR, but also may cause all kinds of other problems like immune suppression and other things you don't want. So it's like, you got to be careful with these compounds, and you got to know how to use them. And personally, I like the idea of using these phytochemicals. And there's this concept that called phytohormesis, which people are talking about, which is like, the hot and cold we talked about earlier in the podcast. These plants are like toxins. They're the plant's defense mechanisms. But like a little dose of them also activates our biology to repair and heal. It's kind of mind blowing, and I don't want to get too kind of woo-woo about it, but actually when you understand how does like these molecules know to bind to these receptors in our body, like it's just mind-blowing. So I think we co-evolve with these plants, and our bodies are kind of lazy, and we don't make vitamin C because we can get it from food. Well, we don't make a lot of these compounds because we can get it from these plants that we grew co-evolved with. And so I think this whole science of food as medicine is just beginning. And what's really exciting is the Rockefeller Foundation, I think, is spending $200 million partnering with other groups to create the periodic table of phytochemicals. There's 25,000. There's probably a lot more that we haven't even discovered. It's like just a kind of a treasure trove of medicines that are out there that we now can use as part of our diet, or as teas, or as herbs and spices, or as supplements to actually help us live a long time and be healthy.
I personally believe, and hopefully at the end of this conversation, you'll believe, or others will, that we're about to go into a renaissance of health. We're about to massively disrupt the health industry, reinvent it, and start to add. Amen to that, right? Of course, you and I are both on carrying the signs around. Vive la revolution! Let's reinvent this crazy, insane system, which is so moribund. Anyway, but I think this decade, we're going to start to have new tools to slow, stop, and reverse aging. And I'm convinced myself from the people I've spoken to, I don't know, when I was in medical school, I didn't get a chance to watch much TV, but I remember watching, I would watch Star Trek once in a while. That was sort of like my, if I had a little bit of time, I'd watch a Star Trek episode, and that was like, the way the world
Dr.
should be.
Spock with the spy quarter, right?
Yes,
Tricorder.
yes, exactly. But I remember watching one television show on long-lived sea life that that species of like bowhead whales could live 200 plus years, and the Greenland shark could live 400 or 500 years, and sea turtles could live equal. And I was like, if they can live that long, why can't we? I mean, I was like kind of pissed and perplexed at the same time. And I made the decision it was either a hardware problem or a software problem. And that we were going to start to understand how do we change our software, or how do we change our hardware? So that's the frame that I have. Yes, we've had some recent decreases, and a lot of the increase, as you well know, in average, and the word average here is the key part. Average life expectancy has been the massive reduction in childhood mortality and the ability to deal with diseases early.
Clean water.
Clean water. Oh my God.
Sanitation.
Half the disease burden of the planet is due to unclean drinking water. It's crazy. Knock that domino over. So I don't think the recent gains in longevity are really the kinds of gains in longevity that I'm working towards.
It was the first hurdle we had to overcome, which was deal with the bad water and infectious disease, and we did a good job at that. But now we're looking at the aging process, and as I began to look at it over the decades, it's really clear to me that what most of us see as aging in this country is abnormal aging. It's biological processes that have gone awry, that are really dysfunctional states of biology. And then if we learn how to work with biology to optimize those states, whether it's inflammation or oxidative stress or changes to the microbiome or hormones or brain chemistry or your structural system tissues, you can really stop and even reverse the phenomena that we see as aging in this country.
For sure. But even doing that, the question becomes, can we all get to 100 healthy? Can we get to 120 healthy? And what's beyond that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm working on both sides of the equation. A number of the companies I have and the work that I'm doing, this book that Tony and I have worked 3 years on, Life Force, is really around increasing your vitality, your energy, avoiding the ravages of obesity and diabetes and heart disease and so forth. And there's incredible new technologies on the
how to do that
on the horizon. In we looked at all of the stuff in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and then there's the basics: diet, sleeping, and exercise, which and we so reduction. Don't want to spend our time doing, but we must. So how do we take this a piece at a time? There's an interesting. Let me start with a big exclamation point on something that was a big insight in writing this book.
Yeah,
and
the book is called Life Force. It's out now. You can get it anywhere you get books.
Yes,
it's a very thick tome, like War and Peace, but it's your life. And if you want to put more life in your years and more years in your life, this is the book you should get.
Thank you. And it's written in a way that read section 1, and then you can cherry pick if you're focused on heart disease or dementia or inflammation or cancer. Go read the chapter on that. It's a look at all of everything that's been approved or what's in phase 2, phase 3 clinical research that will be approved in the next few years. It's all really hard science in a very understandable fashion. The goal of this book is to give you hope for the future, to give you a roadmap of what you should be doing now and what you should be looking for, right? It's a roadmap for a longer, healthier life. I mean, I'm looking for myself, and people may think it's insane, a multi-100-year lifespan. But, if I shoot for that and I get 120 or 150, well,
I think you're going for the multi-hundreds. I was just going for 120. I feel like I'm kind of falling behind here, I'm just trying to get with the program. Multi-hundreds. I didn't even think of that.
There's a couple of things to think about. First of all, there's a concept called longevity escape velocity, which you're familiar with. Aubrey de Grey, Ray Kurzweil have spoken about this. And that the notion is that as science is beginning to understand why we age and why we don't have to, And as science is making more and more breakthroughs in the underlying diseases, there is a moment in time where for every year that you're alive, science is extending your life for more than a year. And that moment in time is called longevity escape velocity. When I asked Ray Kurzweil, Ray's brilliant. He's passionate about this area. He's my co-founder at Singularity University. He wrote "The Singularity is Near" and has written extensively about longevity. I said, "So Ray, when do you expect we're going to hit longevity escape velocity?" His answer was in the next 12 to 14 years. Which is
so basically what you're saying is if you can survive 12 years, you can live forever. Is that the idea?
That's his comment. I'm not going to back that up. But then I went and spoke to George Church, and I said to George, and George is professor of genomics at Harvard Medical School. He's brilliant. One of the early people across gene therapy, CRISPR. He's created 24 companies in 24 months. Would never bet against George. And I said, when do you expect we'll see longevity escape velocity? And he gave me the same answer. He said, the next 12 to 15 years. And so, but that's crazy, right? So we'll come back to that in a moment. What are the implications?
So you think we can make it to our early 70s, Peter? You and I will be in our early 70s then.
I'm shooting
we'll be all right.
I'm definitely shooting for it. Here's the realization that we have just in the last 10 years, and you know this so well, the unveiling of CRISPR and all the different modalities of CRISPR and of gene therapy and of reading,
writing.
Explain
for people what CRISPR is, because I don't think people understand what that is.
So you can think of we have 3.2 billion letters in our genome that comes from our mother and 3.2 billion letters that comes from our father. And over the last 25 years from the Human Genome Program and Celera, we've developed the technology to read that genome, to actually read out what are the 3.2 billion letters that shape you. It's your genome. And reading your genome is useful. But what we've now done in the technology called CRISPR, I won't accurately, it's an acronym for clustered repeats is the CR in here. But it's a technology derived from bacteria that were using this technology to protect themselves against bacteriophage, viruses infecting the bacteria. Long story short, it's a tool for being able to accurately edit your genome. So in the same way that Word allows you to read a document of all of the letters and words, 3.2 billion letters in the book of your life, CRISPR is the way that you can actually edit it accurately. And so the ability to read your genome and edit your genome and write your genome, and then a new technology called gene therapy comes along, which is the ability to actually use a virus as a robot to inject into the cells you want a specific gene. So it's like being able to inject into the book of your life a paragraph where you want it to say something. Anyway, these are incredible tools that are giving us the ability to not accept what we're born with, but to begin.
So if you have a single gene mutation, like let's say Huntington's chorea
or thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, right?
Right. You can actually edit those genes to actually change the proteins that are produced that change the course of that person's life.
And what's incredible is it's not a treatment for these genetic diseases. It is a cure. It is like one and done. You're cured. And so Editas, a company started by George Church out of Boston, has a CRISPR treatment to cure a form of genetic blindness. And so a person's born with this particular genetic mutation, they're blind, an injection in the back of the eye, and they can see again. They're cured. It's biblical in nature. It's incredible stuff. So, but it's interesting. So now the question is, if you have these 3.2 billion letters when you're born, and when you have it when you're the same 3.2 billion letters at age 25, when you got all your musculature on the beach or you're in a bikini, you look great, you feel great, and then you have the same 3.2 billion letters when you're 80. Why don't you look the same?
That's a great question.
What is it? Why aren't you? I mean, I'm running the same computer code. why am I looking differently?
Yes. Why is the software output different, right?
Yeah. And so this is fascinating. This is the work that was best explained so far by Dr. David Sinclair, also at a Harvard Medical School, who wrote a book called Lifespan, which is amazing. I think Lifespan and Life Force are two books that will go hand in hand.
He must know something about aging because he's like 50 something. He looks like 12.
I tell you, I'm
I don't know what's up with that.
He's my
I love David.
He's my poster child. I'm running. He's when you're in a marathon and there's somebody that you're pacing yourself against. He's the guy that I'm like, I've got to pace myself against David. He does. He looks like he's 30, and his you write in the book in the chapter. We have all these heroes in the book. David Sinclair. We say David's got two numbers. He's 53 in chronological age. But his biological age by aging clocks is like 35 or something like that.
Yeah,
and he looks
amazing. Well, I did mine. I'm 62, and did a few years ago, but it was 39. So
amazing.
It's possible. Yeah.
It is possible. Yeah, I'm tracking. I'm 60, and I'm tracking in my mid-late 40s. My goal is to get down to a David Sinclair level of my mid-30s. And then I feel like, I feel like I'm 28, but I have sort of the emotional maturity of a 9-year-old, but that's a different story.
Oh, no, I think you're good. You're curious. You're in wonder all the time and awe, which is actually a trait you should never give up.
I don't ever want to
about
give
you
up.
most, Peter.
So let's go back to the question. If you have your same genome at birth at 25 and 80, what's going on? And so it's a concept called the epigenome. Epi meaning above in Greek. And it is, in fact, the way that your genome is controlled. So what's going on at birth at age 25 and 80 plus, as you know, is not all your genes are turned on or all your genes are turned off. So your epigenome controls which genes are on and which genes are off. And so in your youth, you've got many more genes turned on to create the proteins in your skin. And as you get older, some of those genes turn off, and they should be on. Genes that are on that should be off, and genes that are off that should be on. And that is what's thought to account for the aging process. And so let's double click on that, because there's a very interesting construct and rationale of why that occurs. And I find it one of the most, when I'm on the stage talking about aging, I want to convey this because it helps people understand what's going on. So it turns out that we have a set of 7 genes, which are our sirtuin genes that generate the sirtuin proteins. And these sirtuins control which genes are on and which genes are off. It controls the epigenome. But these sirtuins also are responsible for DNA repair. Mm-hmm. And I want you to imagine that your 3.2 billion letters are the piano keys on the piano. And you're playing the piano. You're the sirtuins that are determining which keys should be played and which keys should not be played. And early in your life, you've got this thing on the side of you, like this clock you have to repair. And early in your life, the clock is doing fine, and you're not distracted by repairing it. But as the pianist, as you're continuing in life, you're playing the right keys, you're pushing the right ones and not pushing the wrong ones. But as things go on, you have to repair this clock more and more, and you're being distracted. Yeah. So you're trying to keep the clock repaired. At the same time, you're trying to play the right keys, and it becomes more and more difficult. But then there's another part of this, which is that these sirtuin proteins are powered by NAD in your cells. And as you get older, your NAD levels, sort of an energy currency, if you would, in the cells, your NAD levels drop by half. So all of a sudden, as the pianist, you're spending more and more of your time doing repairs, and having less and less energy to do the whole thing, and you become distracted, and the epigenome regulation of your body falls apart. So what David believes he has been able to demonstrate, and we talk about this in the chapter on on David Sinclair, and I wrote in another chapter I wrote on longevity, that he has discovered that using 3 out of the 4 Yamanaka factors allows him to reset the epigenome in the living cell.
And it's a big mouthful. What's a Yamanaka factor?
Yeah, what's a Yamanaka factor? I mean, it's interesting. Can I get one off the kitchen counter?
Yeah.
So a guy, Dr. Yamanaka, Nobel laureate, discovered that you can take a differentiated cell, a skin cell, a nerve cell, a heart cell, a liver cell, whatever it is, and return it back to its pluripotent state. What does that mean? When we're born, we have like one cell, like the fertilized egg, and that grows and grows and grows and eventually differentiates into all these different kinds of cells in your body: your skin cell, your bone, your muscle, your heart, your nerve, your liver, your kidney. And all those cells have the same genome. But again, it's which of those genes are turned on and which of those genes are turned off determine what kind of a cell it is, what its function is. And we've heard of stem cells, and those stem cells have the ability to differentiate into any one of these specialized cells. Well, Yamanaka determined that these four factors, these 4 genes, proteins, if you utilize them, you can turn a differentiated cell back into a pluripotent stem cell that could then, you could take it from a skin cell to a pluripotent stem cell and then make it a heart cell or make it a nerve cell.
Wow. So you can like reverse the process of the evolution of the cell from its final form into its pre-existing state.
Exactly. And we'll come back to this in a little bit on the work of Dean Kamen, who's manufacturing or backup set of organs for all of us, which is insane. Hold on for that one. Long story short, David Sinclair, working with 3 out of the 4 Yamanaka factors, was able to reverse the age and publish this in December of 2020 on the cover of Nature. Reverse the age of the vision system of long-lived mice. So these mice who had gone blind with a whole set of age-related decrepitation of their vision system, their optic nerve, he was able to bring them back to an earlier state where they were fully functional. It's since been done with the heart of mice. And so the question is, can you get your body to go back to a state of, hey, this is what your body should look like. These are the genes that should be on and off when you're, instead of 60, when you're at 40 or at 30. And the concept is age reversal, which is extraordinary. I'm working on, Mark, right now, and when we did our walk, if we talked about this, I'm working on a $100 million age reversal X Prize.
Yeah. That's
I've
pretty exciting.
Yeah. I've raised about 3/4 of the capital for it. We launched a $100 million gigaton carbon removal prize that Elon funded. And this is the next big one I want to do. Get teams around the world working on how do you reverse aging. In this case, we'll ask them to do 25%, 20 years in humans with a therapeutic that lasts less than a year. But there's serious conversations about this now.
If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here. I'm beyond shocked at the level of nutritional deficiencies. And I have a clientele that's generally well off, that understands health and nutrition, that's trying to do the right thing. I don't see a lot of people now, I used to, but don't see a lot of people now who, eat